Our party's position, the People's Freedom Party and the Free Democratic Party of Germany share the same values, and our principal vision is identical, and hence we can discuss what we can and must do. When I spoke about the dominating view today, it's about the kind of mobilization spirit. It's a spirit of mobilization that the authorities are trying to put in place. But this is shaky because for the citizens it's associated with some memories of the Soviet Union when they were being told that the world should fear us just because we exist and they should respect us. But this is not the essential factor that determines the people's life today. And when we say what we want, when we discuss what we must do in the opposition of in the Russian opposition and among our Western partners and all the civilized world is our partners today, and the OECD meeting has been rightly referred to. The Soviet Union was a founder of that organization, and the Soviet Union assumed the obligation of respecting human rights. It was a transatlantic agreement which we all agreed to go by in the late 20th century as well as the 21st century. And when we're discussing what has happened today, we, the democratic opposition in Russia, continue to rely on these values, and the entire civilized world continues to rely on them, whereas the Russian authorities, for some reason, do not want to do so. The Soviet Union, not only Gorbachev, but the previous leaders were trying to comply with the Helsinki Act. They released some prisoners and did more. Now the Russian president is saying we don't like this agreement, let's do something else. And I'm happy to hear European diplomats saying we do not need another security mechanism. We should not yield to that. So what are we to do? There are two things to be done. One should take a broader look.
This time, our Russian authority, unlike the Soviet times when it was the nuclear threat used, now the Russian authority follows with the same principles of Soviet mentality or way of thinking, trying to introduce it into our life. A KGB sort of mindset which they are trying to introduce, which means no democracy. In the Soviet time, everything was simplified and complex problems were solved by simplified ways. Today, instead of elections, we have the vertical structure of power. Instead of separation of authorities, we also have this vertical structure and the authority of the upper layer person. It was said that all the OSCE countries expressed their decision that what the Russian authorities are doing is inadmissible. That should be taken to reason. If the whole world thinks that this is inadmissible and our leadership say that they are right and try to convince us of that, this surely is impossible. You can't be right if you ground your arguments on some false consumptions, and you can't state that everybody else is wrong.
And indeed, when we say that within the 6 months of the aggression, when our party jointly with other political groups urged Muscovites twice to take to the streets on 2 occasions. And I'll probably mention the past meetings of Sakharov Square and Bolotnaya Square. But when we urged them to come out into the streets to protest this war in conditions of totalitarian propaganda, when people were marching with slogans, hands off Ukraine, we don't want to live in the 21st century with a mentality, with a 19th century mentality. This means that it is not 15%, but a lot more people do not accept this policy. And we will continue this line. We will continue to persuade our citizens that our constitution is correct and that our vision is correct and the civilized world is correct when it says that everybody should live in harmony in accordance with the principles that have been in effect throughout this time, including United Nations documents, OSCE, and other documents. And I am happy that we are hearing the voice of the European Union, and EU diplomats have always criticized themselves for not having a single foreign policy and single security policy. And the time has come when this was demonstrated, when the vital interests of the European Union were threatened. This happened, and it was not only EU interests, but also the interests of the true Russia, not Putin's Russia, but true Russia. And I am sure that most people will shortly support that. And this is not a very distant future. Why not? Because we are considering 2 evident factors today. 15% or more of the citizens do not accept this, and secondly, the economic situation, which of course exerts pressure on the political decisions that the current authorities may be taking. So what kind of circumstances are these? Evgeny Grigorievich Yasin said it's a worldwide crisis, but I affirm that the policy of the past decade, Putin's crony capitalism model, has led to zero growth. It cannot even assure stagnation. Next year, we're going to have a recession, an economic recession, and although there's no complete consensus, but there's a feeling that the decline in the GDP will be 2 to 4%. Of course, it's not critical. It's not 30%, but it's an important factor. It's the result of that policy, and in fact, economic downturn. And this decline in oil prices that we have observed, and the sectoral sanctions, targeted sanctions against state-controlled corporations, and I want to emphasize it's not against the entire country, not the entire financial or oil and gas sector, but against the state-controlled corporations. These are tools in Putin's hands. So these sanctions are not against the country or its people, but against the tools held by Putin, which enable him to keep his promises of handing out money. But that's not enough even for that. So what are we to do? And let me explain the promise that we made at our party forum. We will continue defending the interests of our country's future the way we see it. But I'm satisfied for the first time to note that there's at least unity in understanding on the part of the West, that the aggressor cannot be allowed to do that, whether inside this country or abroad. This is inadmissible, and transatlantic unity is extremely important in that. And when well, it has been said today that no one wants sanctions because they won't result in anything. This is not true. The sanctions do make the authorities, the leadership of this country, think about what they're going to do next. In principle, the sanctions already taken are sufficient. You just have to be consistent and stop saying we want to lift those sanctions, because you don't want to do that. Why say that? I think it's the wrong stand. It creates an impression that you can come to an agreement tomorrow. No, you cannot. And when Ms. Baer said that we dream of restoring trust, you will never be able to restore trust with Putin's regime. With a regime headed by Putin or someone like him, there will be no trust. You will never be able to return to cooperating with them. So stand on your principles and values, and these values are ours too. We are defending them here, and you defend your values there, but these values unite us, and if we do so, then very shortly, within a couple of years, serious change will happen. Thank you.